Picture a man standing at the crossroads of legend and infamy. A lawman whose name would echo through history, not for the outlaws he faced down, but for the 18 seconds that would haunt him forever. This is the story of Wyatt Earp's most controversial decision, a choice that transformed him from frontier marshal into something far more complicated. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the myth and expose the man beneath the badge. The street is empty. 5 men wait in the shadows. 2 brothers stand beside Wyatt Earp, their hands hovering near their weapons. In moments, gunfire will shatter the afternoon silence. Bodies will fall, blood will stain the dust, and a nation will argue for over a century about whether what happened next was justice or murder. But to understand this moment, we must first understand the man who orchestrated it. Wyatt Barry Stapp Earp. Even his name carries weight. Born into a restless family that moved from town to town, he learned early that survival meant adaptation. His father, Nicholas, was a man of rigid principles and violent temper, qualities young Wyatt would inherit in full measure. His mother, Virginia, tried to soften the rough edges of her sons, but the frontier had a way of sharpening men into weapons. By his 20s, Wyatt had already lived several lifetimes. Freight hauler, buffalo hunter, brothel bouncer. He married young, a woman named Urilla Sutherland who died within months, possibly from typhoid, possibly during childbirth. The records are murky, deliberately so. Wyatt never spoke of her again. When a man buries his heart that deep, what grows in its place? He drifted through Kansas, Ellsworth, Wichita, finally Dodge City. These weren't towns in any civilized sense. They were pressure valves where cowboys released months of pent-up energy after cattle drives, where gambling, prostitution, and violence weren't vices but industries. Dodge City needed men who could stand in the gap between chaos and commerce. Wyatt Earp was that man. As assistant marshal, he developed a reputation. Not as a gunfighter, Wyatt rarely drew his weapon. His preferred method was buffaloing, pistol-whipping troublemakers into submission. Brutal, efficient, and importantly, it kept the body count low. The business owners loved him. The cowboys feared him. And Wyatt? He was building something more valuable than money. He was building a mythology around his name. But Dodge City was a temporary kingdom. Wyatt's eyes turned south to Arizona territory, where silver strikes were minting millionaires overnight. The town of Tombstone erupted from the desert like a fever dream. 10,000 souls crammed into crude buildings, all chasing the same glittering promise. Where others saw opportunity, Wyatt Earp saw a chessboard. He arrived with his brothers, Virgil, the idealist who believed in law and order, Morgan, the youngest and most loyal, James, who ran a saloon, and Warren, still finding his way. The Earp clan descended on Tombstone like a dynasty in the making. Wyatt invested in gambling concessions and mining claims. Virgil became city marshal, then deputy U.S. marshal. They were building an empire, but they weren't the only players in the game. Enter the Cowboys, not the romanticized cattle herders of dime novels, but something more dangerous, a loose confederation of rustlers, smugglers, and gunmen who operated on both sides of the Mexican border. They stole cattle in Mexico, sold them in Arizona. Stole cattle in Arizona, sold them in Mexico. They intimidated farmers, manipulated elections, and when necessary, killed anyone who stood in their way. The McLaury brothers, Frank and Tom, ranchers who provided cover for stolen livestock. The Clanton family, Old Man Clanton and his sons, Ike and Billy, who ran the smuggling operations. Curly Bill Brocious, a stone-cold killer with a smile that never reached his eyes. Johnny Ringo, the educated gunman who quoted Shakespeare while planning murders. And caught between these two forces was Tombstone itself, a town that couldn't decide whether it wanted civilization or chaos. Wyatt's position was complicated by his relationships. He was living with Josephine Marcus, a vivacious former actress who had previously been involved with Sheriff Johnny Bean. Bean, who had promised to make Wyatt his deputy, then reneged. Bean, who was cozy with the Cowboys and turning a blind eye to their activities. A romantic rivalry and a political one. twisted together like a fuse burning toward dynamite. Doc Holliday added another volatile element. John Henry Holliday, dentist turned gambler, dying slowly from tuberculosis, loyal to Wyatt with the intensity of a man who had nothing left to lose. Doc was brilliant, lethal, and utterly unpredictable. The Cowboys hated him. Wyatt trusted him absolutely. That loyalty would prove consequential. The conflict started small. A stagecoach robbery. Accusations. Counter-accusations. Virgil arrested some cowboys for disorderly conduct. They threatened revenge. Wyatt got into a physical altercation with Ike Clanton in the middle of the street. These weren't isolated incidents. They were declarations of war, each side testing the other's resolve. Then came a night that changed everything. Ike Clanton, drunk and armed, staggered through Tombstone, threatening to kill the Earps on sight. He spent hours broadcasting his intentions to anyone who would listen. "The Earps have got to fight," he shouted. "I'll be ready for them in the morning." It wasn't uncommon for drunk men to make threats. But Ike wasn't just any drunk man, and these weren't idle words. Morning came. Ike was still armed, still making threats. Virgil and Morgan found him and pistol-whipped him, dragging him before a judge. While Ike was being fined for carrying weapons in the city limits, Wyatt confronted Tom McLaury on the street. Words were exchanged. Then Wyatt drew his pistol and slapped Tom across the face with it, sending him sprawling. Another line crossed. Now here's where the official story and the truth begin to diverge. According to the Earps, they received word that the Cowboys, Ike and Billy Clanton, Tom and Frank McLaury, and Billy Claiborne, were gathering near the OK Corral, armed and dangerous. Virgil, as city marshal, decided they needed to be disarmed. Wyatt and Morgan went with him. Doc Holliday insisted on coming too, for Lawman going to face 5 Cowboys. But was it really that simple? Let's examine what we know. The Cowboys were indeed armed, which violated city ordinances. But they were also making preparations to leave town. Horses were being readied. They were in a vacant lot adjacent to the OK Corral, not in the middle of the street terrorizing citizens. Witnesses would later testify that at least some of them seemed to be trying to comply with the law. Virgil carried a cane in his right hand and a pistol in his left. Morgan and Wyatt had their hands near their weapons. But Doc Holliday? He carried a shotgun under his long coat and a pistol at his hip. You don't bring a shotgun to a disarmament. You bring a shotgun to an execution. They walked down Fremont Street. From men in a line, citizens scattered. Everyone could feel it, the electricity in the air before lightning strikes. The Earps and Holliday turned into the vacant lot where the Cowboys waited. What happened next lasted 18 seconds. But those 18 seconds have been analyzed, debated, and mythologized for over a century. Virgil shouted something. Witnesses disagree on the exact words. "Throw up your hands, or we've come to disarm you." Frank McLaury and Billy Clanton reached for their weapons. Or maybe they were raising their hands. The accounts conflict. Then the shooting started. Doc Holliday's shotgun roared, striking Tom McLaury. Wyatt drew and fired at Frank McLaury. Bullets flew from both sides. Morgan shot Billy Clanton. Ike Clanton, unarmed despite his earlier threats, grabbed Wyatt's arm screaming, "Don't shoot me. I don't want to fight." Wyatt shoved him away. The fightings commenced. Get to fighting or get away. Ike ran. In 18 seconds, 30 shots were fired. When the smoke cleared, 3 Cowboys were dead or dying. Tom McLaury shot twice. Frank McLaury, bullet through the head. Billy Clanton, multiple wounds but still alive, begging for more ammunition so he could keep fighting. He died shortly after. On the Earp side, Virgil and Morgan were wounded. Doc Holliday had a holster graze. Wyatt walked away without a scratch, a fact that would fuel conspiracy theories for decades. The town exploded, not in celebration, but in division. Half saw the Earps as heroes who had confronted dangerous criminals. Half saw them as murderers who had assassinated men who were trying to leave town peacefully. The Cowboys had their weapons, yes, but they hadn't drawn first. Or had they? 27 witnesses gave testimony, and no 2 stories matched perfectly. The Clanton faction demanded murder charges. Wyatt and his brothers were arrested. A preliminary hearing lasted a month. Judge Wells Spicer examined the evidence and ultimately ruled that the Earps and Holliday had acted within their authority as lawmen. But his decision satisfied no one. It was legally sound, but morally ambiguous. And the blood didn't stop flowing. 2 months later, Virgil was ambushed at night, shotgun from the darkness. He survived, but lost the use of his left arm. The attackers were never identified, but everyone knew who was responsible. The Cowboys were sending a message. The law couldn't protect the Earps. 3 months after that, Morgan was assassinated while playing billiards. Shot through a window, the bullet severing his spine. He died in Wyatt's arms, whispering, "I can't see a damned thing." Wyatt held his brother's body, and something inside him died too. Or perhaps something darker was born. This is where Wyatt Earp made his most controversial decision. Not the gunfight at the Corral. That could be defended as a lawman's duty, however questionable. No, what came next was something else entirely. Something that the law books had no category for. Wyatt Earp, deputized as a U.S. Marshal, assembled a posse. Warren Earp, Doc Holliday, Texas Jack Vermillion, Turkey Creek Jack Johnson, Sherman McMaster. These weren't lawmen enforcing warrants. They were an execution squad, and Wyatt led them on what history would call his vendetta ride. They rode through Arizona territory like the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Their first target was Frank Stillwell, suspected in Morgan's murder. They found him at a train station. Witnesses heard shotgun blasts and pistol fire. Stillwell's body was found the next morning, riddled with bullets. Wyatt never denied killing him. In fact, he seemed proud of it. Next was Florentino Cruz, another suspected accomplice. Wyatt tracked him down personally. Cruz begged for his life. Wyatt shot him anyway. "I let him talk until I was satisfied he was one of the men who killed Morgan," Wyatt said later. No trial, no jury, just Wyatt's satisfaction. Then Curly Bill Brocious, the most dangerous of the Cowboys. Accounts vary, but most agree that Wyatt confronted him near Iron Springs. Curly Bill fired first with a shotgun, shredding Wyatt's coat but missing his body. Wyatt returned fire with both barrels of his shotgun, nearly cutting Curly Bill in half. Or so the story goes. Curly Bill's body was never found, leading some to believe he escaped. Others think Wyatt buried him where he fell. For weeks, Wyatt's posse roamed the territory, settling scores. The Cowboys scattered. Some fled to Mexico. Others went aground. Johnny Ringo, the educated killer, was found dead under a tree, a bullet through his temple. Was it suicide? Murder? Wyatt always claimed he was elsewhere, but the timing was convenient. By the time Wyatt finally left Arizona, the cowboy threat was effectively destroyed. But at what cost? Here's what makes Wyatt Earp's decision so controversial, so endlessly fascinating. He operated in a gray zone where law and justice diverged. The legal system had failed to protect his family. His brother was murdered. Another was crippled. So Wyatt took matters into his own hands. Was it justice? He tracked down the men responsible for Morgan's death and ended them. No appeals, no dilas, no legal maneuvering, just finality. Or was it revenge? Cold-blooded executions carried out under the thin veneer of legal authority. Wyatt wore a deputy marshal's badge during the vendetta ride, but he answered to no judge or jury. He was judge, jury, and executioner rolled into one. The truth? It was probably both. Justice and revenge aren't always opposites. Sometimes they're the same thing, viewed from different angles. What's remarkable is how Wyatt's reputation survived this. In any other context, a lawman going on a multi-week killing spree would be condemned universally. But the frontier operated by different rules. The Cowboys were genuinely dangerous criminals. Morgan's murder was genuinely unjust. And Wyatt? He did what the official system couldn't. He stopped them. But let's be honest about what that means. It means we're comfortable with extrajudicial killings when we agree with the outcome. It means we celebrate vigilante justice when it targets people we consider deserving. It means we Leoneize men who bypass the law when the law proves inadequate. That's the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the Wyatt Earp legend. We've turned him into a hero not despite his controversial decision, but because of it. So what's the truth about Wyatt Earp's most controversial decision? The truth is that it wasn't one decision. It was a series of choices, each one building on the last, each one pushing him further from conventional law and deeper into something more primal. The decision to confront the Cowboys that afternoon, the decision to bring Doc and his shotgun, the decision to open fire, the decision to hunt down his brother's killers, the decision to keep killing until the threat was eliminated. Each choice made sense in the moment. Each choice could be justified by the circumstances. But together, they form a pattern that's harder to defend. They reveal a man who believed that his judgment was more reliable than the law. A man who viewed violence not as a last resort, but as an effective tool. A man who never doubted his own righteousness, even when that righteousness led to bodies in the street. The controversial decision wasn't just about tactics or timing. It was philosophical. Wyatt Earp decided that he was the arbiter of justice in Tombstone and beyond. He decided that his authority superseded courts and judges. He decided that some men deserved to die, and he appointed himself their executioner. In America, we decided we were okay with that. We turned him into a legend, stamped his face on collectors' plates, made movies and television shows celebrating his violent righteousness. We built monuments to a man who operated outside the law because we believe, deep down, that sometimes the law isn't enough. Stand in Tombstone today, and you can still feel it. The town has turned the gunfight into a tourist attraction. Actors recreate those 18 seconds multiple times daily. Visitors pose next to bronze statues of Wyatt and his brothers. The mythology is now an industry. But walk through Boot Hill Graveyard and you'll find the graves of Tom McLaury, Frank McLaury, and Billy Clanton. Their markers are simple, their stories largely forgotten, except as footnotes to Wyatt's legend. They were somebody's sons, somebody's brothers. They died in 18 seconds and have been dying in reenactments ever since, forever cast as the villains in someone else's heroic narrative. That's the real controversy. Not whether Wyatt was justified in what he did, but how easily we accept one man's version of events as definitive truth. How readily we excuse violence when it's committed by someone we've decided to admire. Wyatt Earp lived to be 80 years old. He died peacefully in Los Angeles, surrounded by people who treated him like a living legend. He never expressed regret for the men he killed. He never questioned whether he'd made the right choices. He carried his controversial decisions with the confidence of a man who believed history would vindicate him. And in a sense it did. We remember Wyatt Earp. The Cowboys are mostly forgotten. But perhaps the question isn't whether Wyatt made the right decision. Perhaps it's whether we're comfortable with the precedent his legend sets. Because every time we celebrate a vigilante hero, every time we cheer when someone bypasses the law to deliver justice, we're making Wyatt's decision all over again. We're deciding that sometimes the ends justify the means. That sometimes the right man with the right motivation can be trusted to kill without consequence. That's a dangerous lesson to draw from history. But it's also an undeniably seductive one. Wyatt Earp stood at the crossroads of law and violence, chose violence, and became immortal. His most controversial decision wasn't just about the Cowboys in that vacant lot. It was about the kind of society we want to live in, one governed by law or one governed by the will of strong men who believe. Tombstone answered that question with gunfire. America answered it by making Wyatt Earp a legend. And tonight, you've heard the story behind the legend. The blood beneath the bronze. The bodies behind the badge. The controversial decision that echoed through history and asks us, even now, what we're willing to accept in the name of justice. Wyatt Earp, lawman, gambler, killer, legend. A man who decided that his justice was the only justice that mattered. History has spent over a century trying to decide if he was right. What do you think? This has been Twisted Tales TV, where legends face judgment and history reveals its secrets.